The ArchestrA trend control is used to chart attribute current values from the Wonderware application server. The control reads the real-time data from the running objects in the galaxy and displays a live trend to the user. The trend control supports the built-in functionality of the owning object property for trends configured with a relative reference. The trend control supports the built-in functionality of the owning object property for trends configured with relative reference. Let's take a closer look at other trend controls in the ArchestrA trend control by switching to the software.
Xong viết về sớm nha. Đây, tranh thủ cái nào được thì xong cái mình chứ không nha. Viết cái ví dụ như vô hỏi scope như thế nào, phối hợp làm xong rút nha. Okay. Ở dưới dầu đầu.
The ArchestrA trend control is a .NET control that is part of a galaxy when using System Platform 3.1 or greater. The ArchestrA IDE is pre-configured and displaying a deployed sample galaxy to provide real-time data to demonstrate the control in this training. The .NET controls, as well as all the other graphics and symbols in the galaxy, are displayed in the graphics toolbox. These are the symbols and controls available when we create a new galaxy. As we can see, there is just the alarm client and the trend client controls available in this new galaxy. Now, let's create a new symbol to test the trend client control. For this training, we create a new symbol and then rename it to Trend Test. Like any other .NET control and symbol in the galaxy we may be using, we can use the Embedded Graphics button. Click the Embedded Graphic button to navigate or browse to the graphic toolbox. Then, locate the .NET control and paste it onto the canvas. As a note, both the alarm and the trend client are located on the Tools panel in the ArchestrA symbol editor for quick and easy access. So let's use the tool to paste for our trend client. The trend client control displays on the canvas. Right-click the control, select Edit Animation. The Edit Animations window appears. When we open the animation window, notice we have more options. Not just the data binding in the event configuration that one may get with any .NET control. There is a GUI interface to allow us to configure all the other property options for this control. For example, the pin area is where we add and configure the different pins. The appearance area is where we can modify the look and the feel of the trend. Options allows us to change some of the behavior of the trend control. For historical sources, which we discuss in a later section, this allows us to connect the trend to a historian and then initialize it. Let's start with the very basics to see how to add a pin and then look at the trend control in runtime. First, we need to add a row. Click the plus sign from the top right-hand corner of the animation window. This adds the row for a new pin. Now we need to provide the pin name or an expression or reference of the data for what we want to trend. If we leave the pin name empty, then the expression or reference is used as the pin name. So we will add a name to keep it simple. We have two mixers deployed in our galaxy, which we will use for our trend. For our first pin, we name it Level 1. Then browse the galaxy using the hierarchical name and find our first mixer, Mixer 100, lat.pv. We use that reference to test our trend. Notice the pen details area was automatically completed for us since we used the Galaxy Browser option. If we had manually entered the expression or reference above, these fields would not have populated automatically. We would have had to enter the information ourselves. Since we use the browser method, we are going to leave the defaults as is. We click OK, and then save the trend. Now we're ready to test it. We can see on the design canvas the name of the pin we just configured. If we use multiple pins, which we will do later, we see all the different pins displayed in the design. With our trend pin, also referred to as a symbol, saved, we go to our InTouch application, which for this training, we already created an InTouch application with one test window and nothing else. We now browse our graphic toolbox in the Galaxy and look for the trend test symbol. Embed it into the InTouch and then switch to runtime to see it working. It takes a moment for the trend to display our data from right to left. When it does show, we might have a hard time seeing it. Notice that the line being trended is yellow. We did not select this color. The trend by default has a highlight pin functionality. So the selected pin, and remember, we may have more than one, is highlighted by default with this yellow highlighter. This could make it hard to see on a white background. So we're going to change this. We right-click on the trend and we can see there's a few options. The first one is the highlight pin. Let's uncheck this so we can see the default color for this particular pin, which happens to be blue and much easier to read. We now see level 1 for our first mixer trending with the data from the Galaxy. However, notice the text is overlapping. Let's look at some of the other configurations and take care of that compressed text as well. Returning to development and to our symbol editor, we need to look at some of the other options. Notice regarding the font on the animation window, there is no option to change the font or the font size. So where can we make these changes to the font? We close the editor, select the trend on the canvas, and look at the Properties panel on the right. Scroll down and we see the Text Style section. This is where we can modify our font. We click the ellipsis to change the style, the color, and the font size. We make our change. Notice this resized our trend chart. We simply change the size before we return to InTouch. Then, refresh the chart and go back to runtime again. The text is much easier to read. However, we see once again, we have the highlight pin option on. Let's uncheck it so we can see the data. Now after a few seconds, we see our trending data all the way at the top, just hitting 100. Let's return to development and return to our symbol editor to look at some other configuration options we can use for our trend.
Nước biết nó nhập kiểu gì vậy? Vậy thì nước này chứ mấy?
Let's look again at the expression or reference field and something else we can do. First, we add another pin row. We call it level 1/2. Then browse and choose another tag. However, this tag may have a much higher range than our current range of 0 to 100. So this time in the expression or reference field, we're going to divide the value by 2. Click OK. Then save and let's view this in runtime. Again, we uncheck the highlight pin. Now we see two different trends. The one at the top of the chart is the full value, and the pink one at the bottom is the new tag's value in half.
Chưa
Now,
làm cái đó hả?
notice the name that is showing on the chart is the one for the second pin,
Ủa hả?
the last one we added. What if we want to be able to select different pins we have on our trend?
Tuần trước.
Let's return to configuration options and see what we have to allow us to do just that. We return to the
Biết là
ArchestrA
anh lấy cái đó
symbol
làm tiếp.
editor, edit animations, and review the pen details and options.
Ở đây hả?
We have four basic pieces of
Đúng rồi.
information:
Cái này bông
the
cũ.
description, units of measure, the min, and the max.
À,
The min and the max are the trend
bây giờ
low
mới giờ
and
có cái
trend
gì
high
việc
values,
có luôn.
basically the range that the
Cái gì
trend
chưa đọc
uses
nữa.
for the
Tức là
chart.
bản thân em anh
These
kêu
values
forward
are
cho em
being
lại.
read from the galaxy right now,
Đẹp không?
but we can always switch to a static source
Okay.
to put a constant here if we want to, instead of reading from the object. Other things we can configure are the color of each pin, the line thickness, and the style of the pin trend line, as well as if we were to use an analog reference or expression, we can indicate the number of decimal places of the data, or switch to a scientific notation. We will come back to plot type options in a moment. If we go to the appearance section, we see several options. Most of these are pretty straightforward. The background color of the chart,
Là sao?
the border color. Do we want to add a gradient to the
Để
background
giữ lại phải
color?
không?
Show the grid or
Hồi xưa anh
not?
làm công
The
ty
style of the
mà
grid. And here's an option to allow the highlight pin. If we uncheck this option, we will not have the highlight pin enabled anymore, and we will not be able to use it. Let's uncheck it for now and click OK, and go back to InTouch and Runtime. Now we do not have the highlight pin. We can see both pins in their original color. And if we right-click the trend, the highlight pin option is disabled. Bottom line is, if we want to use the highlight pin options, by default it is enabled and it highlights the selected pin. When we go to the scripting section, we see how we can programmably turn this on and off. In the meantime, let's disable the highlight pin. Here we can format the axis for the X and the Y. We always have the axis for the X displayed with all the divisions, and here is for the time options. Now this is pretty basic and straightforward. Let's take a look at the options section. If we select the checkbox for Show Pin Selector, we see, even in the design mode, what is displayed here. It adds this box, which shows us in runtime a list of every single pin that is added to the trend. We will see the pin name, the expression, description, and the min and the max. And we can select which one we want to use in the chart. Let's see this in runtime. And now we can select a pen, and we can see the name change in the chart area depending on which pin is selected. If we had the highlight pin option enabled, when we selected a pin, it would be highlighted. Returning to the configuration of the trend, we continue our look at some of the other options. Let's go ahead and delete the 1/2 value pin using the expression, and we're going to add a new pin. We call it Inlet 1. We want to add the data trend about the state of the valve, the inlet valve PV, to the trend. Notice the data type is a custom enumeration, meaning this is an object-based discrete device, so PV is going to be treated as an integer. We have one for close, and one for open, another for traveling, and finally one for full. We are not going to use the state 3 in the list. By default, we just added these 4. Now, let's see how the trend looks. However, there will be an error. Click OK, and there is our error. This is because we did not modify the engineering units on one of our objects. Going back to the edit animations, we select that pin with the error, the one that has the reference to the engineering units. That is our valve and does not have any engineering units. We're simply going to delete the text and leave the field empty. so it does not request
Để
that
em
information
cái
anymore.
mail đi em.
Returning
Hoặc là
to
chưa, hoặc là mai
InTouch,
em bấm
go
cái
to
mail đi.
Runtime to see
Bấm
how
cái
the
mail là
trend is
review cái
displayed.
post
Remember,
đi
we
ha.
added 4 attributes to our
Ha.
inlet 1, open, fill,
Không đi.
traveling,
Thấy
and close.
tâm
So on
trạng thì
our
cũng không tốt
trend,
lắm.
we
Rồi
should
thôi
see
cái
the
việc dựa vào
plotting
việc
of
đó
those
ha.
4 states.
Muốn
However,
hay sao?
notice what is happening on our trend. The green plot, which is our inlet 1, is showing more of a flat line. The blue line is our level 1. That plot line is going down, meaning the mixer is emptying, which inlet 1 should also show a change in state. When the level 1 trend reaches 0,
Cái chỗ phút.
notice the inlet 1 plot
Bây giờ
made a
về
quick
giúp
jump
gì nè.
up. What does that mean?
Rồi
Could it
thôi,
mean it's filling?
share cái chỗ
Then
này.
it plots down. Then there is
Nó
another
review
flat
cái
line,
chuyện
possibly
xong
trying
chưa
to
nữa.
represent
Chat cái
the
xong.
traveling state. But this is a bit confusing. Is this line the best representation of what is happening with this variable? Can we really see our 4 states clearly? Can we see a clear distinction between open, fill, traveling, and closed? We should be able to look at this plotting on our trend and clearly see what is happening. So let's take a look at the different plot types that we have to use to configure the trend. When we select a pin, we have different plot type options. We have step, line, and auto. We set the plot type option per pin. Every pin in the chart can be displayed differently based on their plot type configuration. Returning to our presentation, let's look at the pin plot types. As we just mentioned, every pin in the chart can be displayed differently based on their plot type configuration. There are 3 different plot types available to each pin in the trend. A line plot type is best suited for charting continuously changing analog data. A step plot type is best suited for discrete data. And point plot type is more appropriate for analog data that is not continuous. When we select a plot type of auto, the curve type is determined as follows. For tags retrieved from a Wonderware Historian
Ngon, ngon.
9.0
Anh thấy
or
vụ
higher,
mà
the type
anh
is
em
based on the tag's
sẽ đề
effective
xuất thêm
interpolation setting. For example, tags that use stair-step interpolation are
vậy cái chỗ
trended
mà
as
summarize đó
from a
em
step
em
line,
làm việc khách
and
hàng thôi ha
tags
rồi.
that use linear
Cần cái nốt
interpolation are trended as a line. For all other tags, the curve type is based on the tag type. Step line for discrete tags and line for analog tags. Let's return to the software and explore some additional
Nói vậy thôi chứ
options.
cái phần tiếp cận khách hàng nắm bắt nhu cầu, còn cái việc mà cái đó phần lớn
Now
liên
let's
quan
try
đến
a
phần
different
coding,
plot type for the
đúng không?
pins
Tức
in
là chủ
our
yếu là
training
lắp bóc
chart.
chưa có đủ phần
We
cứng,
know
đúng
we
không?
did not like
Đủ
how the
I/O
valve
rồi, còn cái
state
việc mà
was
sau này những
displayed
cái template
with
đó,
a
mặc dù là
line.
mà đầu tiên
So when
để
the
nói là cái
valve
form
opened,
report là như thế nào, đúng không?
closed,
Thì sau
or
này
went
như
into
đổi thì mình phải
traveling
đổi cho họ
state,
thôi.
it shows this crazy line and
Quan
does
trọng là
not
mình
give
có
us
những
a
thông số để
good
mình bóc đủ cái
representation
số lượng,
for this particular
đủ
data
tắt đủ này
type.
kia thôi.
Returning to configuration of the trend, edit animations, we want to change the plot type to a step line. And now let's try this out in runtime. We should see a very different plotting on the trend once the real-time data appears. We can hide the one for the levels and just look at how this inlet 1 data point is plotted. Now let me show the level again. We can see the draining of the tanks and need to wait for the level to reach 0 before the valve state changes. We now see a very
Thì cái
different
đó là giống
plotting
như
on
kiểu
the
cái
trend.
giống mình em nói là cái đó nó
When the level reaches 0, we can see that the valve changes states. The valve opens.
áp dụng tụi em là sao?
Now we see that there is a transition to a traveling state, then drops down. To finally the level at about 60%, we can see it close. Now we see a step line versus a straight line. This makes a lot more sense for this particular value. We see open, travel, fill,
Rồi,
and close.
cuối cùng
Now, another option on the trend control, if we right-click on the trend, is this freeze option. Let's return to the presentation and discuss freeze and unfreeze.
luôn nhiều thứ cần phải trao đổi.